This is the second episode in the Rallyman GT project, so sit back and enjoy because I'm Pete, and this is Board Game Refab. In this episode, we're going to show you how we scratch built some of the structures for the Rallyman GT project. So throw on your hard hat because we're ready to build. The templates are designed in Google SketchUp and then flattened out. I print them out on cardstock and then rough cut them out of the sheet. Using a glue stick, I attach them to the Plasticard. Once they're glued down, it's time to rough cut them out of the Plasticard. Next, I cut close to, but not on the line, so that when we make the final cut, there isn't as much material to remove. This makes a cleaner edge when we make that final cut. Once they are cut out, you want to stack them in the order that they'll be put together, or label them so that we know which ones are the top, bottom, side, etc. Make sure to peel off the paper before the next step. I have a 90-degree magnetic gluing jig. It's basically just sheet metal attached to scrap wood. It's definitely not perfectly 90 degrees, but it's a heck of a lot closer than I can get freehand. I use the magnets to hold the pieces in place, and then tack those pieces together with just a dot of superglue. Then take either a toothpick or a BBQ skewer, and just spread those dots along the joint. Now, scratch building with Plasticard is super forgiving, so try not to make big mistakes, but any small mishaps can be covered up later on. You just want to be sure that you can get as close to the 90-degree angles and minimize the gaps as much as you can. Once that glue sets up, we're going to use files and sandpaper and just clean up those overhangs. If you have any extra glue that spills out or gets all over the place, trust me, it'll happen. You just want to clean those spots up now. It's not super imperative that it's perfect, but you want to get a nice clean surface for the next step. Essentially, we're taking that frame that we just built and we're going to wrap it with more Plasticard. This is the method I use to get perfect clean edges and tight joints. The best way to measure these pieces is to use the frame as a template. Just lay it out on the Plasticard and mark your cut lines. On the top edge, just add about 5 millimeters or so that it stands taller than the frame. That lip is going to hide the edges of the seats later on. Just measure, cut, and glue one side at a time until you get all the way around the piece. Once it's all glued up, you're going to use the files and sandpaper again to clean up the edges. Hopefully this time around, it's much easier and less sanding is needed. The roof assembly is a very simple design. We're going to take that piece we made earlier and we're just going to wrap the outside edge of it with 2x2 millimeter square rod. Don't worry too much about gaps or any of that because we're going to fill them in later. Before we do the seats, we're going to need some vertical supports for the roof. This will simplify the assembly of the seats, but it's also easier to get to this part now before the seats go in. And do your best to keep these supports perfectly vertical. I used 8mm angle pieces for the seats. You want to measure how long they need to be and then add a millimeter or two. Then test fit the pieces and trim it down. Just keep test fitting and trimming until they fit just right. Once you're happy with the fit, mark the top because once you put glue on it, you only have a few seconds to get it attached to the piece and you don't want to put it on upside down. Trust me. When you're working through this step, start at the top and work your way down. There will be a gap at the bottom and that's fine because we won't be able to see it. As you are gluing, just put a few dots on each piece to get good adhesion. Then go over the joints with extra thin plastic cement. The seats on the larger grandstand are much simpler since they're parallel. We can pre-measure and cut them before we start gluing. We're going to have 3 seat sections and 2 stair sections to equal the full width of the grandstand. Work through each column before you move on to the next one. At this point, we also need to make the angle supports for the roof. Hold the roof on those previous supports at an angle that looks right, and measure the distance from the edge of the roof to the bottom of that vertical support. Cut enough supports, all at the same length, and then glue them in place. We need to clean up some of the work that we've already done. What I use for this is white putty from Squadron products. It's soft and pliable, but it dries really solid. You just want to make sure you only take a little bit out of the tube at a time because it dries pretty quickly. Don't be shy with this stuff though, because you can sand it down smooth, but having to do a second coat is no fun. These templates are also designed in Google SketchUp. Cutting and preparing the parts is identical to the previous build. When gluing them up, it's imperative that the bottom corners are at 90 degrees. As long as those are at 90, the other edges will all match up nicely. I use the grid on my cutting mat to help get that angle. Once it's all nice and set up, you can go from the underside and use all the super glue you want. Take those files and that sandpaper to smooth out all the joints and make it look like one solid piece. To finish them off, I use 2x2mm square rods as the legs of the tent. Thanks for watching. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and follow us on social media to get all of our updates. If you're returning to the channel, welcome back and thanks again so much for the support. Next time we're going to show you how we put the finishing touches on 3 of the tiles for the board. So stay tuned for that. Because I'm Pete, and this was Board Game Refab.